I could still feel the numbness in half of my face when my own daughter locked the basement door behind me. No flowers, no soup, no care. Just the cold floor where I was expected to recover from my stroke. Me, who had sold my business to pay for her college. Me, who had given her everything. I listened as they entertained guests upstairs, heard my recipes being claimed by another woman, watched as my photos disappeared from the walls. My existence was being erased while I was still breathing. But what they didn't know was that my name was still on the deed. What they didn't realize was that a mother pushed too far doesn't just disappear. She becomes something else entirely. And when I finally walked away, taking back everything that was mine, she froze when she saw me. If this story touches your heart, don't forget to follow our channel for more powerful real-life stories. Like and comment below to let us know where you're watching from. Your support means everything to us. I could still feel the numbness in half of my face when the door closed behind me. It wasn't the hospital. It was my daughter's house. And that cold, damp basement was where she decided I should recover from my stroke. No flowers, no soup, no affection. Just the muffled sound of the television upstairs and the echo of my own breathing trying not to cry. Me, who had sold my store to pay for her college education. The doctor had warned me about depression after a stroke, but he never mentioned heartbreak. 3 days before, I'd been sitting in my little kitchen when the right side of my body suddenly stopped working. My coffee cup shattered on the floor and I couldn't even form the words to call for help. My neighbor found me hours later, slumped against the refrigerator. "It's temporary, Mom, just until you get better," my daughter Jennifer said, as she guided me down those basement stairs. But the air mattress deflated every night. A bucket of water was my sink, and the only mirror was a cracked piece stuck to the wall. I tried to tell myself this was better than a nursing home. At least I was with family. But was I? My son-in-law Derek barely looked at me. One day I heard him say to Jennifer, "She doesn't even know who she is anymore. She's babbling." I kept quiet, but I remembered. I remembered every penny I'd put into that house. I remembered the deed, and I remembered the safe hidden behind the fireplace. What they didn't know was that my name was still on everything. "We'll bring your meals down," Jennifer said that first night, not meeting my eyes. I noticed her diamond earrings, the ones I'd given her on her wedding day. She hadn't visited me in the hospital, not once. "Too busy," she texted. Now I understood why. The basement had already been prepared. A single light bulb, the old couch they'd replaced upstairs, a portable toilet behind a flimsy screen. At night I could hear them laughing above me. The sound of glasses clinking, music playing. Once I heard Jennifer say, "It's like having a child again, but worse." Derek's response was too low to make out, but their laughter afterward cut through me like a knife. I spent those first nights staring at the ceiling, counting the water stains and remembering how I'd worked double shifts at the store for years to save for her future, how I'd skipped meals so she could have new clothes for school, the night I sold my wedding ring to pay for her senior prom dress, the mortgage I took out on the store to pay for her college, the pride in her eyes when she graduated, when she said, "I did this all for you, Mom." Now here I was, 63 years old, trapped in a basement with my stroke-weakened body and my crystal-clear memories. They thought the stroke had taken my mind. They thought I was helpless. One afternoon, while they were both at work, I managed to climb those stairs. Each step felt like climbing Mount Everest with my weak leg, but determination pushed me forward. I made it to the living room, out of breath and trembling. Everything had changed. My photos were gone from the walls, my knitted throws and cushions replaced with store-bought ones. It was as if I'd been erased. I hobbled to the fireplace, my fingers tracing the edge of the frame that hung above it. Behind that painting was the safe no one remembered. My late husband had installed it 30 years ago. Inside was the deed to the house, the will, and the papers from when I sold my store, the money from which had bought this very house. I heard a car in the driveway and hurried back down the stairs as fast as my weakened body would allow, nearly falling in my rush. By the time Jennifer came home, I was back on my air mattress pretending to nap. That night, she brought down a tray with lukewarm soup and stale bread. "We're having company this weekend," she said flatly. "Derek's mother is visiting. Try to keep quiet down here, okay? We told her the basement is being renovated. I nodded, my voice barely a whisper. Whatever you need, sweetheart. She turned to leave, then paused. Mom, I need to ask you something. Where are the papers for the house? Derek and I want to refinance. I felt my heart racing but kept my face as still as my stroke would allow. In the bank, I lied. Safety deposit box. Which bank? Her voice had an edge to it. I'll have to think, I said, tapping my temple. Memory's not so good since... I let my voice trail off. She sighed with frustration. Try to remember, Mom. It's important. After she left, I sat in the darkness, listening to the sounds of their life above me. The TV playing some reality show, their footsteps across the kitchen, the garbage disposal grinding. And for the first time since my stroke, I felt something other than sadness and confusion. I felt a calm, cold clarity. They thought they'd buried me alive down here, but they'd forgotten one thing. Even buried seeds eventually grow, and when they break through the soil, they reach for the sun with a strength that can crack concrete. I touched the right side of my face, still numb from the stroke, and whispered to myself in the darkness, they think you're nothing now, but they've forgotten who you are. I opened my palm to reveal what I'd taken from upstairs while they weren't looking, the key to the safe deposit box, the one that didn't exist. Tomorrow, Derek's mother would arrive, and soon, very soon, they would all learn what happens when you put a woman like me in the basement and expect her to disappear. Everything began to change the day I saw a woman enter through the front door with a gift box. The clicking of her heels on the hardwood floors above me echoed down to my basement prison. I was sitting on the edge of my deflated air mattress, trying to do the hand exercises the physical therapist had shown me before Jennifer decided I didn't need those appointments anymore. I could hear voices upstairs, laughter, excitement, sounds that hadn't filled the house since my arrival. Curiosity got the better of me. Using the wooden cane Jennifer had reluctantly bought from a thrift store, I made my slow, painful journey up the stairs. My right leg still dragged slightly, and my right hand trembled against the wall as I steadied myself. I reached the top step and cracked the door open just enough to peer through, and there she was. Beautiful, elegant, with a strong perfume that reached me even from across the room. Her silver blonde hair was styled in an expensive bob, her manicured hands gesturing as she spoke. The perfect image of the country club woman I'd never had the time or money to become while raising Jennifer alone. "Nancy, you shouldn't have," Jennifer exclaimed, opening a beautifully wrapped package. Inside was a cashmere sweater in the exact shade of blue that matched Jennifer's eyes. My eyes, too, though mine had faded with age and worry. "Nothing's too good for my favorite girl," the woman Nancy said, patting Jennifer's cheek in a way I'd done 1,000 times. "Every woman deserves beautiful things." And then I saw something I hadn't seen in years. My daughter smiled like a child, not the tight, obligatory smile she gave me when changing my bed sheets or bringing down trays of food. A real smile, bright and unguarded, her eyes crinkling at the corners, the way they did when she was truly happy. "Nancy is like a real mother to me now," Jennifer said, looking right at me as if she'd known I was there all along. "She understands what it means to be a real woman." Her words hit me like a physical blow. I gripped the doorframe to keep from falling, the room suddenly spinning around me. Derek stood behind them, arms crossed, nodding in agreement. None of them moved to help me. They just stared, as if I were a ghost who had materialized uninvited at their gathering. "Mom," Jennifer finally said, her voice flat. "Nancy is Derek's mother. She's staying with us for a few days." Nancy approached me, her perfume overwhelming as she leaned in for an air kiss near my cheek. "Jennifer has told me so much about you," she said, though her eyes held no warmth. "Such a shame about your condition." "I'm recovering," I said, my words still slightly slurred from the stroke. "The doctor says I'm making progress." "Of course you are," Nancy said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Jennifer, darling, why don't you help your mother back downstairs? We wouldn't want her to overexert herself." That night, alone in the basement, I sat on my deflated mattress and opened my small box of memories, the only possession Jennifer had brought from my apartment. Inside were my daughter's school notes, her first lost tooth, and a bounced check from her father, the man who had walked out when she was 3, leaving me to hold everything together alone. I had worked 60-hour weeks at my little craft store, made her Halloween costumes by hand, helped her with homework late into the night despite my own exhaustion. And now that strange woman was taking my place at the dinner table. I could hear them above me, the clinking of good china, my wedding china, I realized, the pop of a wine bottle being opened, laughter floating down through the floorboards. But what hurt the most was what happened the following afternoon. I had managed to climb the stairs again, determined to be part of whatever was happening in my daughter's life. I found them in the living room, Jennifer sitting cross-legged on the floor like a child, while Nancy perched on the sofa. "This belonged to my grandmother," Nancy was saying, opening a velvet box. "I want you to have it." Inside was a pearl necklace. Nothing extraordinary, but Jennifer gasped as if she'd been given the crown jewels. "I couldn't," she whispered. "Every daughter should have something from her mother's family," Nancy insisted, clasping it around Jennifer's neck. Then I saw it on the side table, my mother's jewelry box. The hand-carved wooden box that had survived the Great Depression, that had held my mother's few precious items, that I had planned to give Jennifer on her 40th birthday next year. Jennifer had given it to Nancy, with a new ribbon wrapped around it. "Do you like it?" Jennifer asked Nancy eagerly. "I found it in Mom's things. I thought you might like it for your earrings." "It's charming," Nancy replied, running her manicured fingers over my family heirloom. "So rustic." I must have made a sound, because they both turned to look at me standing in the doorway. Jennifer's face flushed with guilt for just a moment before hardening. "Mom, you should be resting," she said. "That's my mother's jewelry box," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "It was just sitting in your closet," Jennifer said dismissively. "You never even used it." "Because I was saving it for you." A silence fell over the room. Nancy cleared her throat delicately. "Perhaps I should give you two some privacy." "No need," Jennifer said quickly. "Mom was just going back downstairs. Weren't you, Mom?" That night, I lay on my air mattress, staring into the darkness as tears slid silently down my face and into my ears. The jewelry box had been the last thing my mother had given me before she died. I had polished it monthly for 30 years, waiting for the right moment to pass it on. Above me, I could hear Nancy's voice, telling stories that made Jennifer laugh. I closed my eyes and remembered how Jennifer used to laugh at my stories when she was little, how she would curl against me during thunderstorms, how she once told her kindergarten teacher I was the strongest mommy in the world, because I could carry her and 4 grocery bags up 3 flights of stairs to our apartment. When had I lost her? When had I become someone to hide away? And when had this stranger, this Nancy, become the mother my daughter had always wanted? The next morning, I woke to the sound of car doors slamming and cheerful voices in the driveway. My arm was still weak, the fingers of my right hand curling involuntarily like a withered claw, but my memory was razor sharp. I pulled myself up from the deflated mattress, my joints aching from the damp basement air that seemed to seep into my bones overnight. Through the tiny window near the ceiling, I could see Jennifer loading a picnic basket into the trunk of Derek's SUV. Nancy stood beside her wearing oversized sunglasses and a wide-brimmed hat that made her look like she belonged on the cover of a magazine. They were laughing, carefree, while I sat in my underground prison, forgotten. "We'll be back this evening, Mom," Jennifer called down through the basement door. No invitation to join them. No thought that I might enjoy fresh air and sunshine after weeks in this musty darkness. "There's a sandwich in the mini fridge for lunch." I heard the deadbolt click, locking me in, not intruders out, and then the sound of the car pulling away. Silence fell over the house, a heavy, complete silence that pressed against my eardrums like cotton wool. My chance had arrived. Each stair was like climbing a mountain with my heart in my hands. My right leg dragged behind me and I had to pull myself up using the railing, one step at a time. Halfway up, I had to stop, my breath coming in short, painful gasps. The doctors had warned me not to overexert myself after the stroke. but they hadn't known my own daughter would turn me into a basement prisoner. "Keep going, Eleanor," I whispered to myself, using my full name as my mother had done when she wanted me to be brave. One more step, and another. 20 minutes later, I stood trembling in the living room, victorious but exhausted. Sweat beaded on my forehead, and my heart raced dangerously in my chest. I lowered myself into Jennifer's expensive leather armchair to catch my breath, noticing how she'd redecorated since I'd last been upstairs. The walls were now a trendy gray, instead of the warm yellow I'd helped her paint when she and Derek first bought the house. With my money, when my breathing steadied, I approached the fireplace. The painting above it was new, an abstract piece that looked like something you'd find in a hotel room, all swirls of beige and blue. I reached up with my good arm and carefully lifted it from the wall, revealing what I knew would be there. A small electronic safe, flush with the wall, installed decades ago by my late husband, Martin. Jennifer had been only 7 when Martin died of a sudden heart attack. Too young to remember the safe, too busy with grief to notice when I used it. And in the 25 years since, she'd never known it was there. I'd kept it that way intentionally, a private vault for our most important papers. My fingers trembled as I punched in the code. 10/17/85, Jennifer's birthday. The light flashed green and the door clicked open. Inside lay our most important documents, untouched for years. The deed to the house, still in my name. An old will, never officially registered, where Martin left everything to me. And a sealed envelope containing the contract from when I sold my craft store 5 years ago. The money from which had paid off Jennifer and Derek's mortgage when they were struggling. I reached into the safe and pulled out the stack of papers, my heart pounding in my ears. These weren't just documents. They were proof of my life, my sacrifices, my love. Proof that this house, the house where I was now hidden away like a shameful secret, belonged to me. I remembered the day I'd signed over the money from my store. Jennifer and Derek had been 3 months behind on their mortgage, facing foreclosure. I'd spent 30 years building that little shop from nothing, creating a place where women came to learn crafts, to share stories, to find community. Selling it had felt like selling a piece of my soul. But I'd done it without hesitation, because Jennifer had cried, because she'd said, "Mom, I don't know what we'll do if we lose the house." And now here I was, sleeping on a leaking air mattress in their basement, listening to them entertain the woman who was becoming a real mother to my only child. With papers in hand, I made my slow, painful journey back to the basement before they returned. Each step down was easier than the climb up had been, but my heart felt heavier with each one. I tucked the documents into the lining of my pillowcase, where Jennifer wouldn't think to look. That evening, I heard them return, bubbling with stories about their perfect day. I sat in the dim light of my single bulb, listening to their voices drift down through the floorboards. I could picture them in the kitchen, unpacking the picnic leftovers, Nancy showing Jennifer some sophisticated way to arrange cheese on a plate, Derek opening wine. "She made the most amazing cucumber sandwiches," I heard Jennifer say. "Just like in those British shows you love, Mom." I flinched, thinking for a moment she was talking to me. Then I realized she was calling Nancy Mom now. Later, when Jennifer brought down my dinner tray, I noticed something different in her expression. Not guilt, not even pity, just absence, as if I were already gone from her life. "Did you have a nice day?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. "It was wonderful," she said, not meeting my eyes. "Nancy knows everyone at the country club. She's going to introduce Derek to some potential clients tomorrow." "That's nice," I said, though the words tasted bitter in my mouth. As she turned to go, I asked, "Jennifer, do you remember when we used to have picnics in Central Park, when you were little?" She paused at the bottom of the stairs. "Vaguely," she said. "But those weren't real picnics, Mom. Those were just hot dogs on a bench." The door closed behind her, and I was alone again with my cooling food and my burning thoughts. That night, I saw Jennifer from afar, through the crack in the basement door. She was lying on the sofa with her head in Nancy's lap, smiling as the older woman stroked her hair. My daughter looked happier than I'd seen her in years, happier than she ever looked with me. and in that moment I knew I wasn't needed anymore. I was a burden, an embarrassment, a reminder of harder times best forgotten. But I was still the owner of everything they had, and it was time they remembered that. In the days that followed, I watched as my presence was systematically erased from the house above me. It happened gradually, like a slow-motion disappearing act that I witnessed through brief glimpses whenever I managed to climb those stairs during their absences. On Tuesday, I noticed the family photos were gone from the hallway wall. The chronicle of Jennifer's life, her kindergarten graduation with me kneeling proudly beside her, her high school prom where I'd pinned the corsage I could barely afford to her dress, our mother-daughter trip to Niagara Falls when she turned 16, all vanished, replaced by generic artwork and framed inspirational quotes that Nancy had likely picked out. On Wednesday, I found my recipe box missing from the kitchen counter. The handwritten cards passed down from my grandmother, with secret ingredients underlined and notes in the margins about Jennifer's preferences. Extra cinnamon in the apple pie for Jenny's birthday, were nowhere to be found. In their place sat a glossy cookbook called Modern Entertaining, with Nancy's name inscribed on the inside cover. By Thursday, even the quilted throw I had made during my chemotherapy sessions 10 years ago, the cancer Jennifer rarely mentioned now, as if my survival had been an inconvenience rather than a miracle, had disappeared from the back of the couch. A cashmere blanket in a neutral beige had taken its place. The warm meals Jennifer had initially brought down to the basement were replaced by cold sandwiches or microwaved leftovers, often with bites already taken out, as if I were a dog being fed scraps from the table. Some days, she'd simply leave a plate on the stairs and call down, "Dinner, Mom," before I'd hear her hurrying back to whatever conversation I'd interrupted. On Friday afternoon, with the house empty and silent above me, I found myself seized by a desperate need to see the sun. My skin had grown pale in the basement's perpetual twilight, and I could feel my muscles weakening from disuse. The physical therapist had emphasized the importance of movement and sunlight for my recovery, but these basic needs had been forgotten along with me. I made my laborious journey up the stairs, leaning heavily on my thrift store cane, and opened the back door that led to the garden. The May sunshine hit my face like a physical caress, and I closed my eyes, drinking in the warmth. The scent of lilacs from the neighbor's yard floated on the breeze, mixing with the earthy smell of recently turned soil. Jennifer's garden had always been my pride as well as hers. I had taught her how to plant bulbs when she was 5, her tiny fingers pressing tulip bulbs into the dirt, while I explained that sometimes the most beautiful things had to be buried before they could grow. Now, I noticed new landscaping, formal hedges and expensive perennials that looked like they belonged in a magazine spread rather than the cottage garden we'd cultivated together. I was easing myself onto the garden bench when I heard the front door open. I froze, my heart racing with the fear of being caught outside my designated space. "Mom?" Jennifer's voice called. I heard her heels clicking on the hardwood floors, then the basement door opening. "Mom, are you down there?" Panic seized me. I couldn't make it back to the basement in time. I couldn't even stand up quickly from the bench. I was trapped, caught in the simple act of trying to feel sunshine on my face. Jennifer appeared in the doorway, her expression shifting from concern to irritation when she saw me. "What are you doing out here?" she demanded. "I just wanted to see the garden," I said, my voice small, even to my own ears, "to feel the sun." "It's windy out here, Mom," she said, though the day was perfectly still. "We don't want you catching cold. You could have another stroke." The way she said it, not with fear, but with annoyance, told me everything I needed to know about how she would feel if I did have another stroke. It would be an inconvenience, a burden, perhaps even a relief if it took me permanently out of her way. "I'm sorry," I said, the words bitter on my tongue. I didn't realize I needed permission. Her face hardened. "That's not fair. We're just trying to take care of you." She moved to help me up, her grip on my arm just slightly too tight. "Let's get you back inside where it's safe." As she guided me through the house, I noticed more changes. The bookshelves had been rearranged, my beloved classics and dog-eared paperbacks replaced by sleek coffee table books and self-help titles. Even the scent of the house had changed. My familiar potpourri exchanged for expensive reed diffusers that made my nose itch. That night, the sounds above me were louder than usual. Voices, laughter, the clinking of glasses. I could hear multiple conversations. The rumble of men's voices mixing with women's higher tones. A dinner party, I realized. In my house, while I sat in the basement with a paper plate of cold pasta that Jennifer had dropped off hours earlier. I pressed my ear to the ceiling, straining to hear the conversations. I caught fragments. Something about a country club membership, someone's new boat, plans for a group vacation to the Hamptons. The easy, careless conversations of people who had never had to count pennies or work double shifts or sell their wedding ring to pay a medical bill. "Nancy, this dinner is magnificent," I heard a woman say. "You must give me your salmon recipe." "Family secret," Nancy replied, her voice carrying easily through the floorboards. "Passed down from my grandmother." It was my recipe, the one Jennifer had always requested for her birthday dinners. The one I'd written out for her on a special card when she got married, with a note that said, "To new family traditions." I began to write a letter that night, sitting on my deflated mattress with a stub of pencil and the back of an old envelope. Not to them, but to myself. I wrote about the Christmas when Jennifer was 7 and I couldn't afford presents. So I'd stayed up 3 nights in a row sewing her a doll with button eyes and yarn hair. How she'd clutched it to her chest and declared it the best present ever. I wrote about nursing her through chicken pox and bad breakups, about teaching her to drive in the empty supermarket parking lot, about holding her hand through her first job interview. I wrote to remember who I was, who we had been together, because upstairs they were living as if I were already a ghost, and perhaps in some ways I already was. On Sunday morning at 6 a.m., with the pale blue light filtering through the tiny basement window, I made my decision. The house was silent above me, Jennifer and Derek sleeping late after another evening of entertaining Nancy and her country club friends. Their laughter had drifted down to me until well past midnight. The sound of ice clinking in crystal glasses and Nancy's practiced stories eliciting appreciative chuckles. I dressed carefully in the gray dress with small flowers that I had kept folded at the bottom of my suitcase for weeks. It was the dress I'd worn to Jennifer's college graduation, a splurge I'd allowed myself after saving for months. The fabric hung loosely on my frame now. I'd lost weight in the basement, my appetite diminished by both the stroke and the heartbreak of my daughter's betrayal. My fingers, still clumsy from the stroke, struggled with the buttons. Each one was a small battle, but I refused to give up. I wouldn't leave this place looking as broken as they believed me to be. When I finished dressing, I combed my hair with the plastic comb Jennifer had tossed into my toiletry bag, trying to arrange it to hide the patches that had thinned during my illness. From beneath my deflated mattress, I retrieved the documents I'd taken from the safe. The deed to the house, the will, the records of the store sale, proof that everything they enjoyed had come from my sacrifice. I slid them into my worn leather purse, along with the $67 in cash I'd squirreled away from my Social Security checks before the stroke. The climb up the basement stairs was easier than it had been weeks ago. My physical strength was returning, despite the neglect. Perhaps anger was a more effective medicine than their lukewarm concern had ever been. At the top of the stairs, I paused, listening for any sound of movement. Nothing, not even the coffee maker gurgling. Sunday mornings, Jennifer and Derek slept until at least 9. I made my way to the back door, the one that led through the garden. It would be quieter than the front, with its creaky hinges that Derek had promised to oil for months. My hand trembled on the doorknob, not from weakness, but from the enormity of what I was about to do. For a moment I hesitated. Despite everything, this was my daughter, my only child, the baby I'd felt kick inside me, the toddler whose first steps had been toward my outstretched arms, the teenager who'd crawled into my bed after her first heartbreak. Could I really do this to her? Then I remembered her voice. Nancy is like a real mother to me now. The way she'd locked me in the basement, the family photos removed, my existence erased, my decision crystallized like ice in my veins. I stepped outside into the cool morning air. The grass was damp with dew, soaking through my thin-soled shoes as I made my way across the lawn to the side gate. The neighborhood was still sleeping, curtains drawn, no cars passing on the quiet suburban street. Only a newspaper delivery person on a bicycle nodded to me as I emerged onto the sidewalk. The bus stop was 3 blocks away. Each step felt both terrifying and liberating. My right leg still dragged slightly, and I had to concentrate to keep my balance, but I moved steadily forward. My purse clutched tightly against my side. A dog barked in a nearby yard. Sprinklers hissed to life in another. Normal Sunday sounds in a world that had ceased to be normal for me. I waited at the empty bus stop, checking my watch, a cheap digital one that had replaced the silver Timex Jennifer had taken for safekeeping when I entered the hospital. The bus was due at 6:45. It was 6:38 now. I found myself counting the seconds, irrationally afraid that Jennifer would somehow sense my absence and come speeding down the street to drag me back to my basement prison. The bus arrived with a hiss of hydraulic brakes, the doors folding open like welcoming arms. The driver, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, watched patiently as I climbed the steps with my unsteady gait. "Where to, hun?" she asked, noticing my trembling hands as I fished coins from my purse. "Downtown," I said, my voice stronger than I expected. "The county courthouse." She nodded, not asking why an elderly woman in a too large dress needed to go to the courthouse at dawn on a Sunday. Perhaps she'd seen enough of life's hardships not to question the desperation of others. I took a seat near the front, watching through the window as Jennifer's neighborhood, my neighborhood legally, receded behind us. The ride into downtown took 40 minutes. I spent it staring at my reflection in the window, at the lines grief had etched around my mouth, at the slight droop on the right side of my face that the stroke had left behind. I barely recognized myself anymore. Perhaps that's why it had been so easy for Jennifer to forget who I was. The courthouse was closed, of course, but the notary public whose office sat across the street opened at 8 a.m. even on Sundays. I'd called weeks ago from the old rotary phone in the basement while Jennifer was at work, confirming their hours. The young man who answered hadn't questioned why I needed to know, and I'd been too ashamed to explain. I waited on a bench outside, watching the city wake up around me. A street sweeper rumbled past. A homeless man pushed a shopping cart filled with aluminum cans. 2 joggers in matching outfits ran by, their ponytails swinging in unison. None of them looked at me, just another old woman resting her tired legs. At precisely 8 a.m., a young woman in a blazer unlocked the door of the notary office. I rose shakily from my bench and made my way across the street, clutching my purse with its precious cargo of documents. "Good morning," the woman said, surprise flickering across her face at the sight of her first customer of the day. "How can I help you?" "I need to make changes to some legal documents," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands as I removed the papers from my purse. "It's about my house and my will." 3 hours later, it was done. With my trembling hand, I had signed the papers that revoked any right my daughter had to the house she lived in. I had transferred the property to a foundation that cared for abandoned elderly women like me, who had been discarded when they were no longer useful, and I had removed Jennifer's name from my will, leaving her with nothing but the last name she shared with me. The name she had made clear was now an embarrassment to her. As I stepped back out into the late morning sunshine, a strange lightness filled me. It wasn't happiness. The wound Jennifer had inflicted was too deep for that. It wasn't even satisfaction. It was something more profound, the recognition of my own worth, independent of my daughter's validation. For the first time in decades, I had acted solely for myself. I didn't return to Jennifer's house. Instead, I took another bus to the women's shelter I'd researched weeks ago. During those long, lonely hours in the basement, they had a program specifically for elderly women in transition, women escaping abuse, abandonment, or simply the indignity of being unwanted. That night, while Jennifer and Derek and Nancy dined and laughed in the house that was no longer theirs, I lay on a narrow cot in a room shared with 3 other women, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the shelter, the whir of the industrial fan, the soft crying of a new arrival, the whispered prayers of the woman in the bed beside mine. I should have been frightened. I should have felt lost. Instead, for the first time since my stroke, I felt found. 3 weeks passed in the shelter. 3 weeks of institutional food, shared bathrooms, and the strange comfort of being among women who understood loss without needing explanations. My roommate Doris was 78 and had been evicted from her apartment when her son sold the building without telling her. Marlene, across the hall, had escaped from a second husband who'd begun hitting her after she'd broken her hip. We were all fragments of once complete lives, learning to exist in these new, diminished circumstances. Every morning, I attended the physical therapy sessions the shelter provided, gradually regaining strength in my right side. The therapist, a young man with gentle hands and infinite patience, praised my progress. "You're recovering remarkably well for someone your age," he said, unaware that my motivation came not from a desire for health, but from a burning need to be strong enough to face what was coming. I knew Jennifer would find me eventually. The shelter staff had warned me that family members often tracked down residents, sometimes with good intentions, sometimes not. I'd provided no forwarding address, had taken nothing that could be traced back to me, but I knew my daughter. Once she discovered what I'd done with the house, she would move heaven and earth to find me. It happened on a Wednesday afternoon. I was sitting in the shelter's small garden, a concrete space brightened by potted marigolds and petunias, attempting to knit with my still clumsy fingers. The volunteer who ran the craft circle had given me large wooden needles and thick yarn, easier for stroke-affected hands to manage. I was making a simple scarf, nothing like the intricate patterns I'd once created, but the rhythm of the needles was soothing, a connection to my former self. Ms. Richards, the shelter coordinator, a brisk woman named Tammy, appeared at the garden door. "There's someone here to see you." My heart stuttered in my chest. I'd known this moment would come, had rehearsed what I would say, but now that it was here, I felt unprepared, vulnerable. I set down my knitting, smoothed my donated cardigan, and nodded. Jennifer stood in the reception area, clutching her designer handbag like a shield. She looked thinner than when I'd last seen her, her face drawn, eyes shadowed with fatigue. Her perfectly highlighted hair was pulled back in a hasty ponytail, and her usual immaculate makeup was missing. For a moment, she looked like the little girl who'd come to me after falling off her bicycle, seeking comfort for skinned knees and wounded pride. Then her expression hardened. "You can't do this to me," she said without preamble. "It's unjust. No hello. No, I've been worried sick. No, thank God you're alive." Just the immediate defense of what she perceived as her rights. I gestured to a small meeting room off the reception area, where residents could speak privately with visitors. The shelter had strict rules about confrontations in public spaces. Too many of the women here had traumatic histories with family members. The room was sparse. 2 plastic chairs, a small table, a box of tissues that had seen frequent use. The walls were painted a soothing blue, but nothing could ease the tension crackling between us as we sat across from each other. "Unjust like what?" I asked, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "Like a basement, like a house without retratos, like an inheritance without memory." Jennifer flinched as if I'd slapped her. "That's not fair. You had a stroke. We were taking care of you." Taking care of me? The laugh that escaped me sounded foreign to my own ears, bitter and sharp. "You locked me in a basement, Jennifer. You gave away my mother's jewelry box. You erased me from your home while I was still breathing." "You're exaggerating," she said, but her eyes slid away from mine. "The basement was temporary. We were going to fix up the guest room once you were stronger." "Don't lie to me," I said quietly. "Not now. Not after everything." She was silent for a long moment, her fingers pleating and unpleating the strap of her handbag. Finally, she looked up, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "What do you want from me, Mom? An apology?" "Fine, I'm sorry. Is that enough? Can we fix this now?" "Fix what exactly?" "The house. she said as if it were obvious. The money. You can't just give everything away. That's our security, our future. I studied my daughter's face, searching for some sign of the little girl who had once cried when she found a dead butterfly, who had saved her allowance to buy me a Mother's Day card, who had held my hand through my chemotherapy appointments. That girl was gone, replaced by this woman who saw me only as a resource, a means to maintain her comfortable lifestyle. Your security, I said slowly, was built on my sacrifice. The house you live in? I paid for it with the store I spent 30 years building. The vacations you take? Funded by the retirement I'll never have. The clothes you wear? Purchased while I donned the same sweaters year after year. That's what mothers do, she said defensively. They sacrifice for their children. Yes, I agreed. But children aren't supposed to sacrifice their mothers. The silence that followed was heavy with decades of unspoken truths. Jennifer looked away first, her shoulders slumping slightly. What am I supposed to do now? She asked, her voice small. The bank called. They're foreclosing if we can't make the payments. You'll do what I did when your father left us with nothing but debts and broken promises, I said. You'll start over. You'll work hard. You'll learn the difference between what you want and what you need. And Nancy? The question was almost a whisper. What about her? She's gone, Jennifer admitted, a flush creeping up her neck. As soon as things got difficult, she said she needed to give us space to sort out our family issues. I wasn't surprised. Women like Nancy existed only in the reflected glow of others' prosperity. Once the shine dulled, they moved on to more brilliant surfaces. So you came looking for me, I said, understanding dawning. Not because you missed me, not because you were worried, but because your safety net disappeared. Jennifer didn't deny it. She looked at me with those blue eyes, my eyes filled now with calculation rather than contrition. We can fix this, Mom. You and me, like it's always been. For a moment, I felt myself wavering. This was my child, my only family. The instinct to protect her, to solve her problems, to put her needs above my own was deeply ingrained after decades of single motherhood. But then I remembered the basement, the coldness in her voice when she spoke to me, the way she had called Nancy a real mother, the casual cruelty of erasing me from her home while I still lived and breathed. No, I said, the word falling between us like a stone. Not this time. Jennifer's face contorted with a mixture of disbelief and anger. You can't be serious. You're choosing this? She gestured dismissively at the shelter around us. Over your own daughter? I'm choosing myself, I corrected her. For the first time in my life, she stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the linoleum floor. Fine. Be that way. But don't come crawling back when you realize what a mistake you've made. As she stormed towards the door, I called after her. Jennifer. She paused, her back to me, shoulders tense. I'll always love you. That hasn't changed. But I finally learned to love myself too. She didn't respond, didn't turn. The door closed behind her with a soft click that somehow sounded more final than any slam could have. I sat there for a long time afterward, waiting for the tears to come. They didn't. Instead, I felt a strange sense of completion, as if a circle had finally closed. For the first time since my stroke, perhaps for the first time in my life, I was whole. The last I heard about my daughter came through Patty, a former neighbor who had tracked me down at the women's residence, where I'd moved after 2 months in the shelter. It was a modest apartment complex for senior women with limited incomes, run by the same foundation that now owned Jennifer's house, my house. The irony wasn't lost on me that I now lived in a place funded partly by the property where I'd once been imprisoned. I saw Jennifer at the farmer's market last weekend, Patty said, settling into my small living room's only comfortable chair. She'd brought me a potted orchid and a bag of homemade peanut butter cookies, little offerings of normalcy that made my sparse apartment feel more like a home. She was selling jewelry, little beaded things, pretty but simple. Nothing like those diamond earrings she used to wear. I tried to picture my daughter with her manicured hands and designer clothes, sitting behind a folding table at the farmer's market. The image wouldn't form properly, like a television with poor reception. Jennifer had always considered crafts beneath her, though she'd grown up watching me make everything from quilts to candles in our tiny apartment. How did she look? I asked, pouring Patty another cup of tea from my thrift store teapot. Patty hesitated, stirring sweetener into her cup longer than necessary. Tired, she finally said. Thinner. Her clothes were clean but worn, not like before. I nodded, absorbing this information without allowing myself to feel the tug of maternal worry that threatened at the edges of my consciousness. I'd spent 6 months rebuilding my life, my identity, my sense of self-worth. I couldn't afford to be pulled back into Jennifer's orbit, not when I was finally standing firmly on my own feet again. She asked about you, Patty continued, watching my face carefully. Wanted to know if I'd heard anything. Said she'd tried calling the shelter, but they wouldn't give her any information. The shelter had strict confidentiality policies to protect women from abusive family members. I'd never explicitly told them Jennifer was abusive, but they'd drawn their own conclusions from the basement story and my reluctance to contact her. What did you tell her? I asked, my voice steady despite the sudden flutter in my chest. Nothing specific, just that I'd heard you were doing well. Patty reached across the small coffee table and patted my hand. I didn't mention this place. Figured that was your business to share or not. I squeezed her fingers gratefully. Patty had been the one neighbor who'd noticed my absence from Jennifer's house, who'd kept asking questions until my daughter's vague explanations about a care facility raised red flags. She hadn't known where to find me, but she'd left messages at every shelter and senior residence in the county. When I finally called her back, she'd cried with relief. There's something else, Patty said, hesitation evident in her voice. Something she told people at the market when they asked about her jewelry business. I waited, bracing myself. She's telling everyone that her mother lost her mind after a stroke, that you gave away all your money to strangers and abandoned her. Patty's face flushed with indignation on my behalf. She's using your story, a twisted version of it, to sell her trinkets, playing the sympathetic victim. I should have been angry. I should have felt betrayed all over again. Instead, a strange calm settled over me, a detached pity for the woman my daughter had become. She always was good at reinventing herself, I said softly. Even as a child, she could make anyone believe whatever story served her best. Aren't you upset? Patty asked, clearly surprised by my reaction. I considered the question carefully, stirring my cooling tea. I removed her name from my will, I said finally, but I left a clause. If she ever demonstrates that she's capable of caring for another woman with the same love and dedication I showed her, the foundation might reconsider her position. Do you think she will? Patty asked skeptically. I don't know, I admitted. The Jennifer I raised might have. The woman she's become. I shrugged, leaving the sentence unfinished. That conversation with Patty had been 3 weeks ago. Since then, I'd thrown myself into my new life with renewed vigor. I volunteered at the community center, teaching knitting to children from the local elementary school. My right hand was almost fully functional now, though it still trembled slightly when I was tired. The children didn't mind my occasional clumsiness. They were too busy creating their own uneven scarves and misshapen potholders with expressions of fierce concentration. I was returning from one such session, my knitting bag over my arm and the afternoon sun warm on my face, when I noticed a manila envelope propped against my apartment door. No postmark, no address, just my name written in a handwriting I would recognize anywhere. Inside my apartment, I sat at my small kitchen table and stared at the envelope for a long time before finding the courage to open it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a letter written by hand on lined notebook paper, nothing like the expensive stationery Jennifer had once favored. "Mom," it began. No dear preceding it, no warm greeting. "I don't know if you'll ever read this. I don't even know if you're still alive. The shelter wouldn't tell me anything, and none of your old friends will talk to me. I'm writing this mostly for myself, I think. I lost the house last month. I'm living in a studio apartment now. Derek left. He said he didn't sign up for this kind of life. Nancy hasn't returned my calls since the foreclosure notice came. I'm selling jewelry at the farmer's market and online. Nothing fancy, just beaded necklaces and earrings. It's barely enough to cover rent, but it's something. I remember watching you make things when I was little, how your hands were always busy, always creating. I never understood then what it meant to make something from nothing. The thing is, I get it now. I understand why you were always so tired, why you couldn't afford the things other mothers gave their daughters. I understand what it means to count every dollar, to lie awake worrying about bills. I understand what it cost you to give me everything you did. Now I understand. I just wanted you to see me again. Like before. The letter ended there. No signature, not even your daughter or her name. Just a blank space where closing sentiments should have been. No return address on the envelope. No phone number. No way for me to reach her, even if I wanted to. I folded the letter carefully and returned it to the envelope. Then I opened the drawer where I kept my important papers and tucked it in the back, behind my lease agreement and the brochures for the senior center activities. That night, I dreamed of Jennifer as a little girl, her small hand in mine as we crossed a busy street. "Don't let go, Mommy," she'd said, looking up at me with absolute trust. "I won't," I'd promised. But somewhere along the way, one of us had broken that promise. Perhaps both of us had. In the morning, I added a new sentence to my will. If Jennifer ever reached out to me directly, expressing genuine remorse without asking for money or favors, the foundation should tell her where to find me. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a door left slightly ajar, where before there had been only walls. Today, I live in a simple house with other women who, like me, have learned to live with what they have. Memories, scars, afternoon laughter, and tea with bread. My home is a modest 2-bedroom unit in the senior community run by the foundation. I share it with Doris, my roommate from the shelter, whose son never came looking for her. We've settled into a comfortable routine together, 2 old women finding unexpected companionship in our twilight years. My living room wall holds a tapestry I wove myself during therapy, my first major project after the stroke. The physical therapist suggested it as a way to regain dexterity in my affected hand. The pattern is simple but meaningful. A tree with deep roots and spreading branches, symbolizing growth after trauma. Beside it hangs a small watercolor painting Doris made of our garden patch behind the house, where we grow tomatoes and herbs in the summer. Our kitchen is always fragrant with something baking or simmering. Doris makes incredible sourdough bread, while I've returned to the family recipes I once taught Jennifer. Chicken soup with dumplings, apple cake with cinnamon, pot roast that fills the house with savory warmth. We cook for ourselves, and sometimes for other residents who can no longer manage their own meals. There's healing in feeding others, in watching faces light up at the first taste of homemade comfort. I have a new family now, one of choice, not blood. There's Ruth, who teaches me watercolor painting on Tuesday afternoons. Her hands gnarled with arthritis, but still graceful with a brush. There's Marcus, the retired high school English teacher who runs the community book club and always saves me novels with strong female protagonists. There's Sophia, who walks with me every morning around the community gardens, rain or shine, leaning on her cane as we discuss everything from politics to poetry. Sometimes, in moments of quiet reflection, I wonder about the parallel life I might be living now, the one where I remained in Jennifer's basement, gradually fading away as my presence was systematically erased. Would I still be alive? Would I have eventually been moved to a nursing home once my usefulness as a convenient source of money had been exhausted? Would Jennifer have visited me there, or would she have found that too inconvenient as well? I don't dwell on these thoughts for long. They belong to a past I've worked hard to move beyond, a chapter closed but not forgotten. The lessons I learned in that basement about self-worth, about the difference between love and obligation, about the courage to begin again, have shaped the woman I am now, stronger, wiser, more compassionate toward myself. Occasionally, I hear Jennifer's voice in a television commercial. She found work doing voiceovers for local businesses, furniture stores, car dealerships, department store sales. Her voice has a compelling quality, a warmth that doesn't match the coldness she showed me in those final months together. Sometimes I pause while washing dishes or folding laundry, arrested by the familiar cadence of her speech. the slight lift at the end of sentences that she inherited from me. She still has my name on her birth certificate. Richards, the name I took from a husband who vanished when the responsibilities of fatherhood became too burdensome. The name I kept because changing it seemed like too much paperwork, too much expense for a single mother stretching every dollar. Just a collection of letters that somehow came to represent me, to stand in for my identity when official documents required something more than just Eleanor. Jennifer still carries that name, but nothing else of me, because a name by itself is not a legacy. It's a responsibility. It's a promise to uphold certain values, to honor the generations who carried it before you. Jennifer wears the Richards name like an empty shell, hollow of meaning, divorced from the history and sacrifice it represents. Sometimes, people ask if I regret what I did, cutting my daughter from my will, leaving her to face the consequences of her actions without the safety net I'd always provided. I tell them the truth. I regret accepting the basement in silence for so long. I regret believing that a mother's love meant martyrdom. I regret every moment I taught my daughter that my dignity was less important than her comfort. What I don't regret is reclaiming my life. At 65, I've discovered there are still beginnings to be had, still joy to be found, still purpose to fulfill. I volunteer at the Community Literacy Program, teaching immigrant women to read and write in English. I sit on the Foundation's advisory board, helping shape policies for senior housing. I grow vegetables in the community garden and distribute the harvest to residents on fixed incomes. My life now is smaller in some ways than it once was. My apartment less spacious than the house I once owned, my budget tighter, my physical abilities somewhat diminished by age and illness. But in other ways, it's vastly expanded. I have friendships based on mutual respect rather than obligation. I have days filled with meaningful activity rather than anxious people-pleasing. I have boundaries that protect my well-being and dignity. I carry only what fits in my heart now. The weight of disappointment has lifted, replaced by the lightness of self-acceptance. The grief of losing my daughter remains, a dull ache that flares occasionally into sharp pain, but it no longer defines me. I am more than the mother Jennifer rejected. I am Eleanor Richards, whole and complete in myself. And if someone asks what happened to my daughter, I'll say, she froze when she saw me, because she thought I had disappeared. But I had only stopped being a shadow and returned to being a woman. Sometimes, late at night when sleep eludes me, I imagine Jennifer seeing me now, truly seeing me, not as a resource to be exploited or an inconvenience to be hidden away, but as the woman I've become. I wonder if she would recognize this version of her mother. Spine straight, eyes clear, voice steady. I wonder if she would freeze, confronted with the reality of my resilience. And in those quiet moments between midnight and dawn, I allow myself to hope that someday she might find her way back, not to my money or my support, but to the understanding that love without respect is merely use, that family means seeing each other's humanity, even when it's inconvenient, that her name carries obligations she has yet to fulfill. Until then, I live each day as it comes, grateful for second chances and unexpected blessings. I am no longer waiting for apologies or reconciliation. I am simply living, fully, intentionally, and on my own terms. And that, perhaps, is the greatest victory of all. Sometimes the hardest lesson we learn in life is that love without respect is merely use. I had to lose everything, my home, my daughter, my sense of self, before I could find the courage to reclaim my dignity. What would you have done in my place? Would you have stayed in that basement, slowly fading away as your existence was erased? Or would you have found the strength to walk away, even from your own child? Family should be our sanctuary, not our prison. The name we share carries obligations of care, of respect, of seeing each other's humanity even when it's inconvenient. Sometimes, the bravest act of love is to hold someone accountable, to refuse to enable behavior that diminishes both of you. And sometimes, healing begins only when we stop being shadows and return to being fully ourselves. If my story touched your heart today, please consider following our channel for more powerful real-life stories. Your likes, comments, and shares help these important messages reach those who might need them most. Until next time, remember, you are worthy of dignity, no matter who tries to convince you otherwise.